Hello, True Health Seeker, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Learn True Health podcast. I have a little announcement for everyone who is a health coach, an aspiring health coach, or who works in the healthcare industry. In my interview today, I interview a health coach that specializes in functional diagnostic nutrition. She took a course with FDN to learn how to read labs and how to choose which labs should be run, specifically around understanding the metabolic process. My guest describes it as metabolic chaos and being able to dive in and assess and figure out the right tests, the right labs to run so they can understand the root cause. The example she brings up is that many people with Hashimoto's thyroid, actually the root cause is in their gut health and liver health, and that was the first thing that set off this chain of events that triggered the Hashimoto's. And as long as they still have that liver and that gut dysfunction, they'll never be able to fully heal their Hashimoto's. So many people are going around chasing symptoms, even naturally chasing symptoms, because they haven't been able to get to the root cause. And that's exactly what functional diagnostic nutrition provides. So if you're a holistic health expert or a health coach and you'd love to learn how to read labs and how everything interrelates, if you'd love to learn how to provide that for your clients, that kind of skill set that would take you to the next level, then definitely go to learntruehealth.com/FDN. That's learntruehealth.com/FDN, as in functional diagnostic nutrition, and get more information from that website. You can click through and they'll give you all kinds of information. And then I know by using that link and the coupon code LTH, they're giving $750 off this week. Normally, if you use that code, they told me that they'll give my listeners $500 off, but this week only it's $750 off. And this course is online and at your own pace, which I really enjoy. And this is actually, I'm going to be enrolling and taking this course because I'm very interested, especially after this interview. I'm very interested in learning about how to order these labs and how to interpret these labs. And not only do they teach you how to interpret them, they teach you what to do once you have that information. In fact, Coach Jenn even told me that some people take this course simply for their own knowledge, which I can see myself doing, learning how to apply this for my health, my family's health, but also then helping all of my clients as a health coach. So go to learntruehealth.com/FDN to learn about how you can learn about functional medicine and become a functional diagnostic nutrition certified that adds to your ability to be an excellent health coach. Speaking of being an excellent health coach, there's a free summit for health coaches that's coming up in 14 days. I want you to enroll so you get your spot reserved. It is called the Ultimate Health Coaching Success Summit. They interviewed 36 speakers that are experts in health coaching and marketing, and they teach you how to grow a thriving health coaching business and the things that you can do to make sure that you empower your clients and grow your business. So if you are a health coach or if you're interested in becoming a health coach, you definitely want to attend this free summit. They do also give you an opportunity to buy it and own all of the interviews as well. But if you sign up, you can watch it for free. So go to learntruehealth.com/success. That's learntruehealth.com/success to sign up for the Ultimate Health Coaching Success Summit that's coming up in 14 days. If you do decide to purchase it, you get to watch it right now. So that's something really cool. You can sign up, but if you can't wait and you want to start watching it now and watch it at your own pace, then you can decide to purchase the summit. So learntruehealth.com/success gives you access to the summit, and learntruehealth.com/FDN gives you the access to more information about the Functional Diagnostic Nutrition course. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being a listener. And if you're in the States, happy 4th of July. This is a time where we definitely celebrate with our loved ones, and I hope that you are having a wonderful week celebrating with those that you love most. Enjoy today's interview. Welcome to the Learn True Health podcast. I'm your host, Ashley James. This is episode 365. Well, I am so excited for today's guest. We have with us a functional diagnostic nutrition and transformational coach. I love that title. It's quite a mouthful. Welcome to the show, Jenn Malecha. It is such an honor to have you here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and to provide some information and insights for your listeners.
Absolutely. Well, we were just chatting before we hit record, and you were telling me how you were just listening to one of my more recent episodes about mold and how mold has really played a role in your health journey.
Mm-hmm.
And that you and your family have experienced mold several times, and that and also you now can really help your clients as well with mold, and that it's one of those major things that we don't realize is a major contributing factor to triggering disease and autoimmune conditions, and to kind of maybe being that straw that broke the camel's back for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's fun that we're going to dive into your story, because I think you have a really interesting story that we can all learn from, and then you're going to teach us some great things about helping us heal when we have been faced with stress, maybe not the best diet that we didn't realize was the best diet for us, where hormones are out of balance, maybe we have autoimmune condition, but how do we just finally take control again and get conscious and figure out what are those necessary steps to getting us back to health? And I know that you're here to share some great tips for us today. So I'd love to start by hearing your story.
Yeah, I would love to share it too, because all of us, I think, have a health story in some way, and obstacles or challenges that we've faced. And ultimately, our health is what supports us really living our best life. You think about anything that you do in this lifetime, whether it's your career or with family, or if you love to travel like I do, if you don't have your ideal health and weight, then you're not really getting to optimize those experiences or get the most out of them in a lot of ways. And that was kind of a beginning part of my health journey. Like, I had always been kind of an active kid growing up, and I would say like fairly healthy in comparison to most. Like, my parents had a garden and were really good about making sure that we had balanced meals for dinner, and that we ate, our dinner before we had dessert and things like that. And so I actually went into college to pursue an education in fitness, nutrition, and health, and soaked all of that knowledge up. And in my early 20s, when I was in college, is probably when I first started having some, I would say, health occurrences that began to come to light. And this was very much pre-mold. So I definitely am going to talk about the mold piece. But the mold piece of my health journey is the second obstacle that I had faced. And I think just explaining to the audience a little bit about the journey prior to that is going to help bring light to the mold situation a bit too. And so when I was in my early 20s, I all of a sudden just started to develop seasonal allergies that were worsening year over year over year. And these were things that I never had as a kid, to the point where I was having reoccurring ear infections, and the seasonal allergies were so debilitating that they would take me down for days or sometimes weeks at a time. I remember one of the last ear infections that I had, I was really laid up on the couch for multiple days, just struggling for it to finally go away. And at that time, I was questioning, why was this happening to me? Because I'd never had allergies. I was somebody who really prided myself on always kind of being healthy and not ever getting sick. And along with that, I also started to experience what some people might call like chronic fatigue, where I was a personal trainer at the time. So I graduated college with my degree and went into personal training, where I was kind of figuring out like the future of my career path. And I just remember going to Starbucks in the afternoon times and getting a double Americano in the afternoon and still struggling to keep my eyes open and to stay awake as I was training my afternoon and my evening clients. And that's just not normal. And I was tired all of the time. Like I would go home and literally sit on the couch for 5 minutes and fall asleep like instantly. And I was having different joint aches and pains that were reoccurring. And I thought that just because I was a runner, that those might be normal, but
Mm-hmm.
those became kind of debilitating too. And so it was finally at the age of 26, I was diagnosed with skin cancer, which was kind of
Mm.
this like light bulb aha moment for me because when I really started to ponder, why I was diagnosed with skin cancer, the pieces of the puzzle just really didn't fit together. First of all, it was extremely scary to be diagnosed with skin cancer. I think out of all the diagnoses that one can receive, anything related to cancer is one of the scariest ones to have because you just don't know, like, am I going to survive this? Is it treatable? Is it going to come back? Like, there's so many questions when it comes to cancer. And when I was looking at my specific case, that they start asking you, like the dermatologist and the doctors start asking you if there's any family history of cancer and all the questions that looking for clues about why you would be diagnosed with cancer. And in my family, there was no family history of any cancer related to skin cancer specifically. There was other cancer that ran in my family, but nothing related to skin cancer. I was not what we would qualify as like a chronic tanner, somebody who's out baking themselves on the beach all the time or using the tanning salon on a reoccurrent basis. I was one of the healthiest people that I knew. I'll say quote unquote healthiest people because that version of healthy is not the version of healthy that I practice today. And I'll explain that a little bit also. But at the time I was, eating lean proteins like boneless, skinless chicken breast and having a vegetable with every meal and eating yogurt and berries as a snack and exercising regularly. Like that's most people's definition of healthy, right? And it wasn't until I got into the work that I'm doing now as a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner that I really started to be able to put the pieces of the puzzle together to figure out why I had been diagnosed with skin cancer or how that manifested in my body. And when I enrolled in that training program for functional diagnostic nutrition, one of the things that they have us do actually is like run some lab tests. Like it's a requirement that you have to run a couple of lab tests on yourself as part of the training. And one of the lab tests that I ran was the BioHealth 101. It's a metabolic profile that looks at urinary bile acids, which is basically giving you some insights as to how the liver is functioning. Like, is it sluggish or congested? If it's not moving bile acids through, that can be an indication that there's like toxic buildup that's probably happening in the body because it's just not detoxing as well as it could be. And so my urinary bile acids were high, my liver was clogged. And then it also looks at lipid peroxides, which is a measurement of oxidative stress. And oxidative stress gives you some insights as to like how the body is aging, like is it aging really fast, which can be some indication for cellular damage or DNA damage that's going on. And my oxidative stress was also very high. It also measures something called urinary indican, and which takes a look at how you're digesting protein and can give you some insights about malabsorption, bacterial overgrowth, such as H. pylori or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And my indican was off as well. And after running a stool sample test, I found that I did have H. pylori overgrowth happening in my gut, which attributed to some of the migraine headaches that I was having and the reoccurring low back pain at, I think it's vertebrae T7 is where it's associated with. And then I also ran a salivary adrenal hormone panel, and I had a level of adrenal dysfunction that was going on. So essentially, on the inside, I was a metabolic disaster, even though on the outside, I was doing all of these allegedly healthy things, right? And it just especially when I saw that my liver was clogged and the oxidative stress markers were high, I was like, oh, this is exactly what's cultivating this environment for cancer to basically grow in my body. And I immediately implemented a plan that changed my lifestyle, like my diet, my rest, the exercise, doing more stress reduction type of stuff, eliminating toxins out of my environment, taking supplements to support my body in ways that it needs to be supported. And I'm happy to say that the skin cancer never returned. And here I am this year, 10 years skin cancer free as a result of making some of those lifestyle changes, which is huge.
That is definitely huge. Now, did you just have it surgically removed, or how did you proceed with your oncologist to eliminate the skin cancer and monitor it?
Yeah, so they went into the sites. I had a couple different sites, like one on my leg and a couple on my back. They, cut out a certain diameter around the skin cancer to make sure they get all of the cells, and then they stitch it up. So I've got some beautiful scars on my leg and my back. And then they monitor that over time. Like I had to go for skin checkups every couple of months to make sure that there weren't any new spots that were coming back. Thankfully, the biopsies on the places that they had kind of cut out came back, and like none of them are related. So that indicated that the skin cancer itself wasn't actually spreading. It was just that I had multiple different spots that were happening. So I still go back, every year for a skin cancer check, just because I am going to always be a high risk person from having it previously. And I've never had anything new pop up since those first instances.
Can you share what kind of cancer it was?
Oh, you're going to make me like think about this. I want to say that it's been so long, like I don't really keep track anymore because it's like, something that I just don't think about aside from it being a huge part of my story. I believe it was basal cell melanoma. Um, but I'd have to go back and check my records. I don't actually know that off the top of my head.
Right. You don't sit around going, I had basal cell melanoma type 2.5
Right.
or whatever. Like they come up with all these numbers. You figured out that the environment of your body
Hmm.
expressed itself with skin cancer because the environment of the body was at a point where it couldn't handle its oxidative load,
Mm,
and so it expressed itself with not only with cancer, but like you said, you had fatigue, you had chronic, you were getting chronic infections, now and then allergies, and so all these symptoms, the body was expressing itself, saying I'm out of balance, something is incorrect, something is not optimal. And then you started to dive into those tests. if
mhm.
if all of us were to go get those tests, would we all find that we're, out of balance in some way? Or have you actually seen people who to get these tests and they're all within normal ranges? I mean, is it pretty common to be out of normal ranges when we get these metabolic tests?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I mean, I would say that most of the time I see that people are out of range, but that's because people are coming to me with some type of health complaint that they want to resolve, right? So they already have some insights that their body is signaling to them that something's not right. They don't feel right in their own skin, they don't feel at home in their body. They've been diagnosed with something. And so, yeah, the majority of the testing that I see is going to indicate something's out of balance. If we were running testing on people who said that they felt great on a normal basis, we probably wouldn't really see much. And, sometimes the reason for that too is because everybody has their own threshold of like vitality in a sense. I give the example of like how we can kind of correlate this, or an example of this is, somebody can get stung by a bee and it's the end of the world. It's excruciating pain for them versus another person can get stung by a bee and they don't, feel it at all. So their like pain threshold is different. Or like women who give birth, and some of them are able to give it birth naturally, and they are like, oh, it was like an easy experience, versus other women are like, give me that epidural as soon as possible because they can't handle the pain. So everybody has this bio individuality where our threshold, our adaptability is different. And so there are some people out there where they can recover or adapt from environmental factors and chronic stressors maybe better than some other people. And what's also interesting that I'll add about your question here too is that anytime that we're doing a test, it's only a snapshot in time, and the body's metabolic state is constantly changing. Like your thyroid hormone, for example, can be different every single minute of the day.
Right.
So when I work with clients and we do testing, and through the training that I've received, like one of the things that we really emphasize is that we don't treat the test results, we treat the person. And that's because I definitely have had test results come back, what I would say clean, like there's not really anything on them, but the person feels terrible. And so I'm not going to dismiss the way that the person is feeling just because a
Mm-hmm.
test result comes back saying there's nothing to be found here. Like it could have just been that snapshot in time where we caught it at a good moment and there was nothing to show, but if we would have tested it 5 minutes later, it could look totally different. you know? And then the reverse of that is that I've definitely had people that I've worked with that say, like, well, I feel really good, and their test results show some dysfunction. But if they're telling me that they feel good, there's no point in chasing the test result and having them go through all this stuff if they feel good. Because again, like maybe we just caught it at a bad moment on the test results, you know?
Absolutely. I just was at my naturopath yesterday, and the nurse, the second I walk in, takes my blood pressure is amazing. Like
Hmm.
throughout the day, my blood pressure is absolutely amazing. But the second I just know myself, the second I walk into a nurse's to the naturopath, I had my son, our 4-year-old son, and he was extra hyper yesterday for some reason. So he was just bouncing off the walls, and have my husband with me, and my husband was just a little bit cranky that our son was just bouncing off the walls. And so we're all in one room together with the nurse who's taking my blood pressure. The second I walk in, I'm like, my blood pressure is going to be high. Like I just know that. And it was like 148 over, it was like 97. I'm like, oh, just wait a second, take it again, give me a few minutes. Because again, I have really good blood pressure. So the nurse was like, okay, I'll get the doctor to take it. I'm like, good. Because she used one of those machines. I'm like, what are you doing? You get your sphygmomanometer and take it yourself. Don't put this machine on me. And sure enough, after I had my appointment with my naturopath, and then I'm like, oh, by the way, can you take my blood pressure? She's like, sure. Whips it out. I was 117 over, I think it was like 78 or something like that. I'm like, see,
Hmm.
always my blood pressure is always good. You just got to give me a minute, let me sit down and like recover from the chaos. But that's just it, is when we take a snapshot of one time we take blood pressure, or one time we take
Hmm.
a lab, it can be different from 5 minutes from now. And so we
Exactly.
don't, like you said, we don't want to treat the lab result as though it's like the end all be all, but we need to see the person as a whole. So you're looking at how is the liver functioning, understanding that it can go up. This lab result isn't what it is all the time, but it can go up and down. Thyroid does go up and down. Cortisol
Hmm.
does go up and down. I'm sure there's some tests that you do, like 24-hour urine collection, where it's like an average of 24 hours, or the taking samples of saliva throughout the day for
Hmm.
the like whole day cortisol snapshot, gives you a better understanding of what's going on. But you're really looking at the symptoms. Can you maybe dive into a bit about listening to the body, listening to the symptoms, and how it paints a picture for you? So when someone comes to you and gives you a set of symptoms, you go, aha, it might be this, or it might be that. Can you talk a bit
Hmm.
about those kind of symptoms that you commonly see and what they mean?
Yeah, so let's just first define the fact that symptoms are the last thing to show up in a dysfunctional state. So
Mm.
when you're experiencing symptoms, there's already been some type of dysfunction that's been going on underneath the hood of your car in your body, basically, for a period of time. And you kind of touched on this earlier when we were talking about my skin cancer story, is that my body had been giving me signs, right? The allergies, the fatigue that I was experiencing, the stuff like not being able to manage my weight very well even though I was doing all the right things, those were all symptoms that something was happening. And the skin cancer was like my body raising like a huge red flag, going, hey, like you need to pay attention to this situation that's happening here because this is not good. And I do remember finding that first, it was like a mole almost on my leg, and just really feeling like intuitively it was a foreign thing on my body. It was like, I
Mm.
have, moles on my body and freckles and things like that. And this one, I was like, this feels like it's not supposed to be here. It's like an alien has landed on my leg and I need to go get this thing checked out. And I think that so often most of us are ignoring some of those signs because we consider them normal just because they're common. So symptoms can be very common, but that doesn't mean that they're normal, right? So we need to start looking at like, what are these symptoms that we're experiencing, and how's our body, what is our body trying to tell us as a result of that? And there's a lot of symptoms that we will ignore ignore that we just don't even know their symptoms. So for example, like one of the questions that I ask clients on my intake forms is like, are you sensitive to bright light? And most people would not even think of that as a symptom because it's so normal just to put on sunglasses immediately as you walk out your front door, right? And so when we look at symptoms, the tricky thing about symptoms is that they are cross-related to multiple different systems of the body. So we could take something like fatigue, for example. So fatigue could be related to adrenal dysfunction. It could be related to poor blood sugar regulation. It could be because you're getting inadequate sleep at nighttime. It could be because your T3 hormone is low. It could be because your liver is not functioning very well. Maybe you're nutrient deficient because your gut is dysfunctional. And so the reality is that when it comes to symptoms, like we may never know what the root cause is, but we can always have a positive effect on it. And when one system of the body goes down, then all of the other systems of the body are going to be soon to follow, essentially. So you kind of like going back to your question, Ashley, you asked me, you know, like basically how are you looking at a cluster of symptoms to determine what somebody might have? Well, my job is not to diagnose people with a condition. My job is to look for healing opportunities in the body, because regardless of whatever the condition is, if we go back to the general principles of health and we coach up function or improve function in the body, no matter what their symptoms or conditions are, they're going to start to resolve themselves. I find in my own personal journey and with a lot of the clients that I work with, like a diagnosis actually isn't really helpful in a lot of cases. Like I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's as a result of the mold that we eventually found in our home at a later point in time in my story. And having that diagnosis didn't necessarily change the course for me on what I was going to do to get my body back. Like it still involved modifying my diet, my rest, my exercise, stress reduction, and maybe some strategic supplements that were supporting my thyroid and some other functions that were going on. Like it helped with that. It's like it helps with like 20%, but the other 80% is really just dialing in on those general principles of health that we kind of all know to be true, but I don't think that most of us are really paying attention to or prioritizing sometimes in the ways that we need to really feel our best.
So you have a set of rules for helping people to dial in optimal health, the foundations, the building the strong foundation of health, regardless of what their diagnosis or symptoms are. They follow this set of rules, and I'm pretty sure I could guess some of them, like drink clean, enough clean, healthy water every day, and move your body in a way that brings you joy, and get enough of those wonderful phytonutrients from fruits and vegetables every day. So there's certain things that everyone knows to do, whether they're doing them or not is another thing, but that they really do make a difference. I definitely want to dive into what you teach to build the foundations of health. But first, I'd love to go back and are there symptoms that you could tell us that go, okay, when someone presents with this, and this symptom, this is the test I look for. This is what I look for. This is how I help them. Like, do you have sort of a list of symptoms that when someone experiences it puts a light bulb in your head to go, okay, we should look over here?
Actually, I don't. And because that would be chasing the symptoms versus really understanding what the healing opportunities are within all systems of the body. So when a client comes to me, no matter what the condition is or the issue that they're having, whether it's fatigue or a known autoimmune condition, my goal, like in order to truly understand what is going on with the person on a physiological and a functional level, like I love to run a group of lab tests to look at the hormones, immune, digestion, detoxification, energy, and nervous system. Like, let's get the big picture of what's going on here, because no matter what is the condition or the symptom that they're having, again, going back to that concept that every single system of the body is interconnected, it's a network of systems. So if one system's going down, they may be presenting symptoms in one area, but that area could be completely disconnected or really far away from whatever the root cause is. And a really great example of this is Dr. Tom O'Brien is somebody that I follow and one of my mentors. And in his book, the autoimmune fix, he's talking about a 4-year-old child, or maybe it's not 4, but some like a toddler age child that had a reoccurring growth on their eye, and they couldn't for the life of them figure out what's going on with this. And so they finally cut gluten out of this child's diet, and the growth never came back. And then they tested him to be celiac. And so that can just be an example of how like the root cause or can be far removed from where the symptom is actually showing up. Like you wouldn't suspect that a growth or reoccurring growth or a tumor on your eye is related to celiac disease, right? Like how is the eye related to the gut, is what a lot of people would be considering. And thyroid's another really great example of this too. If you have a poor thyroid function or a sluggish thyroid, well, we have to ask the question of like, why is that happening in the first place? So if you go through the physiological process of thyroid, where you have your TSH that is released from the pituitary gland to stimulate the thyroid to produce T4, and then T4 has to be converted into T3. And then the majority of that conversion happens in the liver and in the intestinal tract. If you have low T3, well, we need to be looking at what's going on in the liver and the intestinal tract also. Like, why are you not converting T4 to T3 properly? Or is it that you're actually not making enough T4 from the thyroid? And if that's the case, then why, asking the question again, like, why is that happening? Like, are you not getting the right amount of nutrients or support? Is the HPA axis not working well? So you can kind of start to see how, like, in order to really understand the whole picture, we want to look at all these different systems of the body at the same time to see how they're all interconnected and where the multiple dysfunctions might be lying. And that is where you understand like how you really get to heal the body. If we can correct cortisol dysfunction, if we can boost liver function, if we can get the gut running better and cleaner, then the thyroid issue is going to resolve itself. We don't want to just go after thyroid. Is that making sense?
Absolutely. Yes. I have a friend with Hashimoto's, and her naturopath finally, after years, discovered that she had small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and now she's being treated for that. And what you're saying is that what's going on in your gut absolutely affects your thyroid and your other hormones.
Exactly. And that's why I have so many people that come to me and say, like, I've been taking thyroid medication, or I've done some things to support my thyroid, but I'm still not feeling better. It's because they're kind of missing some of these other pieces of the puzzle. And so I never really chase a symptom. I'm like, let's actually look at the whole picture and see what's going on, and where are those areas of opportunity where we can boost function in the overall body, which is going to have that same domino effect to help bring the other systems of the body back up and running again.
Cool. So I want to reword my question, because what you were explaining is actually what I want. I want more of that. So when someone comes to you and they have, let's say they've come to you and they've been experiencing the symptoms for a while, or they have a diagnosis like autoimmune, or like, Hashimoto's, so like autoimmune of the thyroid, or some kind of autoimmune condition, or some kind of, maybe their hormones are out of balance in some way, regardless of whether they have a diagnosis or not, but they come to you and they say, this is what's going on with me, or this is what my doctor told me I have, and I'm obviously they're suffering. Can you give us some examples of, okay, so someone comes to you with this diagnosis or this set of symptoms, and you go, aha, we need to look over here. And it's just like thinking like, what do you mean the gut has to do with skin health? Or what do you mean the gut has to do with, or the liver and the gut has to do with thyroid? But can you just explain a bit about why looking at the body holistically is so important when people come with each of these different conditions, and where you want to look to see what's going on, like these different conditions that you end up looking at the health of the liver, or health of the kidneys, or health of the gut, in order to help them to resolve something that doesn't seem like it's related to the gut or the liver or the kidneys.
Yeah. So first I'll say to that is that whatever you're currently experiencing right now in terms of a health issue did not happen overnight. And that is the first thing that I explain to people when we get into a consultation. That's basically where we start. Is I just set the preface the conversation with, like, whatever you're experiencing currently right now did not happen overnight. It's an accumulation of things that have happened over a period of your lifetime that have probably just worn down your body and started to degrade some of these systems, like dysfunction started to set in, and then we had symptoms that arise ultimately. And so I will have people, when we go through their health history, I have them go all the way back to the point of birth, Ashley, because if somebody was a C-section baby or they were not breastfed, for example, those could actually be factors that are affecting their current health for them right now in their 30s, 40s, 50s, or however old that they are, because right from the beginning of their entrance into this lifetime, they were not exposed to the right types of bacteria to really build a healthy microbiome and a healthy immune system. And so we'll usually find clues right there. And then throughout their childhood, there often then becomes more clues of like reoccurring illness or infection that's happened or things that have, and then all of a sudden we get into a state of their menstrual cycles were off from the beginning, and they've forgotten that all of these things have happened over their timeline, or they just haven't really paid attention to them, realizing that they were contributing factors to what's going on with them today. So that's part of my answer to your question, because looking at the whole person means looking at that whole life experience to understand what are all the different types of stress that they have encountered in their lifetime. And I ask people to redefine what the word stress means to them, because we often think that stress is just the mental emotional stress that we encounter when we get in a disagreement with a loved one, or when we have a angry boss, or we get stuck in traffic or something. But stress is anything that places a burden on your body that results in inflammation and leads to dysfunction. So it could be the foods that you're eating that aren't right for you, poor quality sleep that you're getting, over or under exercising, toxins in your environment, and other types of triggers. So when someone comes to me with, let's say that they do have a diagnosis of Hashimoto's, my goal is to understand how they got to that point in the first place, because then that'll give us some insights on how do we go about reversing it. So again, going through that clear health history from the point of their birth all the way leading up to where they currently are, being able to pick out clues of things like, maybe they had hormone imbalances that set in adolescence when they started their menstrual cycle, and they have indicators for what would be like estrogen dominance, which can lead to triggering Hashimoto's and thyroid imbalances. Or if they've been drinking and bathing in toxic water, the chemicals in water that can bind to thyroid hormone and start to create dysfunction that's happening in the body. And that would also give me some insights as to that their liver has been overloaded based on their environmental exposures. Talking about their digestion, what do their bowel movements look like? Do they have bloating or gas? Are they responding to food? Can give us insights about what's going on with gut health. And then how do they sleep? There's some key clues that you can get around sleep. Like if somebody is wired but tired at nighttime and has trouble falling asleep, that usually highly correlates with having a parasite, bacteria, or yeast overgrowth that's going on in the gut. If there's somebody who wakes up reoccurringly in the middle of the night, usually in that window of like maybe 1 to 3 a.m., that's an indication of their blood sugar dropping. So they have poor blood sugar regulation, which probably means that they're not eating the right diet, like macronutrient breakdown, for them to regulate blood sugar, or that they have some cortisol dysfunction that's set in, that's dysregulating blood sugar as well, or they're insulin resistant, and kind of like putting all of the clues of the puzzle together. And whatever all the clues of the puzzle are, they always kind of relate back to like these foundational tests that I run with every single person to start, again, so we can look at the hormone, immune, digestion, detoxification, energy, and nervous system all in one swoop and see this big picture of like, let's look at all the systems. And then based on that information, I will put together a protocol for them that includes strategic recommendations for diet, rest, exercise, stress reduction, supplementation, and toxin removal. And there's reasonable expectation that within 90 days, they should see some really significant improvements in their health. And then if they're not seeing the improvements that I would expect them to see, or making progress in the ways that I would, expect them to, that's where we go back to the drawing board. Okay, let's dive a little bit deeper. Like, you're doing all of the right things. You should be seeing X, Y, and Z results, but you're not getting that. So now let's consider like something like mold in your home or an underlying autoimmune condition that we don't know that you have, or Lyme's or something else that might be deeper that didn't necessarily show up on one of those foundational lab tests. Regardless of some of those deeper issues that are happening, you still need those foundational lab tests to be supporting those systems of the body. Because let's say it is mold toxicity, for example, like you still have to support the hormones, the liver function, the digestive system, the energy, the nervous system, the immune system in order to be able to recover from mold exposure, right?
Mm, I love it. I love that you are looking at the body as a whole and that you have these insights. I knew about the waking up in the middle of the night was blood sugar, but the being jittery, right, but not like tired but wired. I did
Mm-hmm.
not know the connection to parasites. I've had a few really cool interviews about parasites, and it always blows my mind how
Right.
common parasites are. No one wants to talk about it, by the way.
Right.
My mom, when I was about 11 to 11 or 12, so early 90s, like it was either late 80s or early 90s. My mom brought home a book called Guess What Came to Dinner. And I still remember it. My mom put us on a parasite protocol because we got some parasite testing, and we had picked up one parasite from Mexico and two parasites from owning pets, so like cat and
Mm-hmm.
dog parasites. Who knows how long we'd had them for?
Yeah.
It was like a dog, and I think it was like one dog parasite, one cat parasite. I had a dog when I was like an infant. So like the whole family basically had these parasites. Oh yeah, I remember doing the whole parasite cleanse. I was just a kid and I was so into it. I thought it was like, are you kidding me? Like we all have like
Yeah.
worms inside us. And so I grew up, my mom was really into health stuff, and I grew up feeling like doesn't every family do parasite cleanses and drink, fresh smoothies and juices and protein shakes, and doesn't everyone do supplements? Like I grew up, that was my environment. And so I just thought this was totally normal. And now coming into the real world going, this is so not normal. Like parents do not talk about parasites with their kids and go on parasite cleanses. So it's so of course for the majority of people, this is news to them, thinking that we need to deworm ourselves. But
Right.
what one of my previous guest, Dr. Jay Davidson, explains, and he has a whole protocol for getting rid of parasites, especially for people with Lyme disease. And his protocol works really well with people with Lyme. And he says that, back 100 years ago, our great grandparents knew to deworm every year, that we would give these herbs and clays and
Mm-hmm.
all that stuff to all of our farm animals. And we do it to ourselves too, that it was just a known thing. And that since, quote unquote, modern medicine has come in the last just 3 generations, we've really given up our our health. We've handed over our health and health education over to the pharmaceutical companies and the doctors and the hospitals, and we have stopped practicing these daily health habits. So it's been lost. We all moved away from the farm to the city, and with a matter of generations, we forgot about midwifery, and we forgot, about how to take care of ourselves using nature. So now we're coming back. Now we're turning around, going, wait a
Mm-hmm.
second. So listening to the body, what other symptoms do you look for to confirm for you that someone might have a parasite, have parasites, or like have that yeast overgrowth or candida? What other common symptoms happen?
Yeah. So another thing that's interesting is they can correlate with the moon cycle. So we're in a new moon right now. Today's the first day of a new moon. And so usually any kind of symptoms that you're having would be lower in a new moon stage versus during as we get closer to the full moon, if you're having digestive issues or skin issues or anxiety or the sleep issues, so you would see those symptoms start to worsen as you get closer to a full moon because the full moon creates this gravitational pull on the earth. And we know this from like the tide cycles of the ocean that during a full moon, the tide tends to be higher or the tide will shift on the earth, right? And that same gravitational pull kind of happens in our body and creates this awakening response in the kidneys and within parasites and bacteria and yeast. So that would be something to look for, is like start tracking and seeing if your symptoms are worsening as you get closer to the full moon, and as you start to see some relief as the full moon starts to go away and we get into a new moon phase. There's also skin issues can be a result of parasites and bacteria and yeast overgrowth, or they can be connected, because whenever you're experiencing skin issues like rashes or acne, like anything that's coming out in your skin is like an indication that your body's trying to detox something. And parasites and bacteria and yeast overgrowth create their own byproduct or waste product internally, and they can create a really toxic environment for us. Definitely variations within your bowel movements. If you like vary from being more constipated to having diarrhea, if there's a potent smell that comes along with that, sometimes you can actually see what we call biofilm like in the toilet. So if it seems like there's like a filmy substance that's in the toilet, because parasites and bacteria and yeast, they produce biofilm. It's like a protective layer that they produce so that they don't get eliminated. And another thing is teeth grinding. You know, a lot of people don't know that teeth grinding and tinnitus actually can be indications of parasitic or yeast or bacterial overgrowth as well. Like those are some really common things that I see a lot that can be linked to those kinds of critters that are going on in our gut.
Now, one thing that's becoming more and more popular is autoimmune disease. And, one argument is, well, we're better at diagnosing. Like everyone's already, people have always had autoimmune disease. We're just now good at diagnosing it. So that's one argument. Kind of like autism or those on the spectrum, it was like 1 in 10,000 children back when we were kids. And now it's like between 1 in 40 and 1 in 60, depending on boys or girls. And so some people say, well, we're just better at diagnosing it, better at seeing it, is one argument, right? Which we can't really disprove that, but we can definitely show, kind of gather some evidence to prove or disprove it. But ultimately, it's a hypothesis. And so the other hypothesis is that in the last 30 years, many changes have happened in our environment and even in our food chain that have led to people developing autoimmune. So autoimmune is primarily a man-caused illness. That if we were all living peacefully in the jungle, eating fresh fruits and vegetables, and we had no chemicals, we didn't have any pollution, that no one would have autoimmune condition, or that it would be incredibly rare. So this one idea that in the last 30 years it has exacerbated greatly because of we're exposed to so many toxins and the body just can't handle it, right? And so it's showing up as the weak point in that person's genetics. What is your belief around the huge increase that we're seeing in autoimmune? What do you think contributes to triggering it in people?
Well, I think the environment is 80% of any disease, autoimmunity, cardiovascular disease, like whatever is going on, environmental plays a bigger role than I think most people are willing to or want to even acknowledge. And we know this because there are still places around the world, we call them blue zones, where their disease is virtually non-existent. And people are living well into their 90s and their hundreds disease free. And a colleague of mine, Jason Prahl, just did a whole documentary about this called the Human Longevity Project. And they went out and they researched and met with these people that live in these blue zones to figure out, like, well, what are the things that they're doing? Like, what makes it different for them? And environment is the biggest part, just how they live their lives, and the fact that they do live in these areas where toxins and modern society is barely present in their environment. So I think that's a huge factor. When we look at something like autoimmune conditions, the rule says that like 3 things have to be in place. Is one, that you have to have the genetic predisposition to it, but we are not a result of our genes. Like our environment is what turns our genes on or off, essentially. And so you have to have this genetic predisposition to it. Second is that you have to have basically a degree of leaky gut going on. And leaky gut really means that you have a dysfunctional, like, intestinal tract where toxins are crossing the gut barrier, getting into the bloodstream that aren't supposed to, which then is triggering the inflammation in the body and the immune system. And autoimmunity really shows itself when the immune system has become so overwhelmed with so much inflammation that it no longer is able to differentiate between who are the good guys and who are the bad guys, and it starts attacking healthy tissue as well. And so the third piece of autoimmunity then are these triggers for inflammation. And there are some specific triggers that then can be related to certain autoimmune conditions. So, like with Hashimoto's, for example, we've found that Epstein-Barr, or also known as mono, like EBV, is a trigger for Hashimoto's, as well as certain parasites and bacteria like H. pylori bacteria, Blastocystis hominis as a parasite. Those have been strongly correlated with Hashimoto's cases. On the stool sample test that I run with all of my clients, there's actually a section for autoimmune trigger types of bacteria and parasites, where we've got other things like Klebsiella, for example, which is a common one that we can find amongst a lot of people. Gluten is a trigger for some autoimmune conditions, obviously celiac, but also crosses over to Hashimoto's as well. And then there's certain toxins in our environment. So if we look at this fact of like what you're saying, I love that you're bringing these two hypotheses to light, because yes, we're better at diagnosing. Like, I've been diagnosed with Hashimoto's, and when I was looking at family history, both of my grandmothers were being treated for a thyroid disorder, but they hadn't necessarily been diagnosed with Hashimoto's. Now, knowing that I've been diagnosed with Hashimoto's, they're long past, but I could probably make a really good assumption saying they probably had Hashimoto's too. It just wasn't, nobody knew how to diagnose it then, right? And there's studies and surveys that have been done within the traditional medical world with doctors coming out of school to ask them, like, how comfortable do they feel with diagnosing autoimmune conditions? And the reality is that they don't really feel that comfortable about it. And so I do think it's been underdiagnosed for a long period of time, but that means that we actually could have had higher populations of people in the previous generations that had autoimmune conditions. And we would have to ask, well, why would they have those autoimmune conditions? And then we start to look at environment again. So they kind of really interplay with each other, I think, and environment is a huge factor. And that's what we have to be more conscious of, because I know that for myself, reversing my Hashimoto's, the way that I was able to do that was by changing my environment and changing my lifestyle. Just because you've been diagnosed with something doesn't mean that you're doomed to live that way or have that forever. I will always have to be aware of this risk factor that I have, but I don't have to live a life suffering with Hashimoto's, because we do have that ability to change our environment and our lifestyle and to reverse the effects of it, essentially.
I'm glad you brought that up, because some people, and especially some doctors, will tell their patients that you have an autoimmune condition, you're going to have it for the rest of your life. If I had stuck with MDs, they would have kept me on metformin and kept me in diabetes. There's luckily a lot of MDs, especially if any MDs listening to the show, which about 20% of my listeners are holistic health or health professionals. So I have had some MDs write me and say, "Hey, I'm not one of the bad guys." And not that I'm not trying to like bash them, but it's just if you take all of them, that there's a majority that will, give their patient metformin or give their patient, insulin if it's called for, and tell them, okay, follow the diabetes, American Diabetes Association diet. And we're gonna manage your diabetes, your type. I'm talking about type 2. Obviously type 1 is a totally different concept, but type 2 being that the body can still produce its own insulin, and the blood sugar is out of control. It's not in healthy ranges, and the body's able to produce insulin. So type 2 diabetes. So going to see, I keep saying traditional, like quote unquote, pharmaceutical allopathic based medicine. You go to see that MD, they put you on drugs to quote unquote manage, as in We're not curing you. We're not going to reverse it. You will always have diabetes. We're just going to try to manage it.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people that have an autoimmune condition get the same treatment, get the same spiel that we're going to put you on these drugs. We'll test you every few years, but there's no talk of let's reverse it, let's cure it, let's no longer have it. It's no, this is, you have it and you will always have it. Maybe your body will spontaneously go into remission, but you'll always have it. So that's one
Mm-hmm.
philosophy, right? And then we have to pull ourselves out of that box, pull ourselves out of that man-made philosophy, man-made confinement, and pull ourselves out to this new way of thinking where the body has the miraculous ability to heal itself if we give it what it needs, and if we stop giving it what it doesn't need.
Exactly.
And that
Exactly.
diagnosis is man-made. That it's a set of symptoms, and the body can correct itself. So we're not so broken that we'll always be broken. That's what the pharmaceutical companies want us to believe.
Mm-hmm.
But that the body has a miraculous ability to heal itself. So let's not own the diagnosis as though it's a death sentence or a life sentence or a how we are defined or confined, right?
Exactly.
Instead we come out of it. So just take yourself out and go, okay, my body has a set of symptoms, something's going on, let's heal the body, and it's reversible. Now, if I went and decided to eat junk food every day, if I went and ate the standard American diet, I could recreate diabetes in my body. That's just how my genetics express when I fill it full of junk, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I know that about myself. And someone like you could recreate or autoimmune condition or the skin condition. You could recreate that based on a set of, you could give your body a set of circumstances like McDonald's and Starbucks every day and
Mm-hmm.
figure out how to recreate that disease. So it's kind of empowering once we realize that the choices we've been making 50 times a day, everything we put in our mouth and how we choose to manage our stress or not manage our stress, and whether we're moving our body in a way that brings us joy or not. But every single choice that we're making every day has built up and led us to the disease state we're in. And
Correct.
that we can shift that, like you said, 80% is the environment. We can shift it and help the body gain health. And coming all the way back to our birth, can you elaborate on why, even knowing whether you're a C-section or whether you've been birthed vaginally and whether you were breastfed or not, why that can play a factor in someone's health now, 30 or 50 years later?
So when you're a natural birth, you go through the vaginal canal, and at that point you're exposed to all the bacteria within the vaginal canal, and that bacteria is what helps to stimulate your own microbiome growth and helps to stimulate the strength of your immune system. So if you were a C-section baby or if you have C-section children, you're missing out on this like once in a lifetime opportunity. We're not going back up or down that vaginal canal ever in our lifetime, right? So, there is a practice out there. Obviously, C-section has to happen sometimes because of, medical concerns, or if the mom or the baby's life is at risk and things like that. And there are some doctors out there who will practice, or this is something that you should request if you ever get yourself in a position of having a C-section baby, is that they can still sweep the vaginal canal and smear some of that bacteria over the baby's face and the mouth and eyes so that they get some of that exposure, and that can be really helpful. And then when it comes to breastfeeding, there's colostrum, right? So the mother produces the colostrum. There's also bacteria that's coming from the mother's body that's, again, helping to boost the immune system and helping to build the microbiome. And so if we don't get exposed to that from a young age, then we're basically missing some of the building blocks that are really, really critical to the future of our health. And aside from that, when breastfeeding doesn't take place, then what are we supplementing with? We're supplementing with formula, which tends to be really high in sugar, and that is then disrupting or causing inflammation within the intestinal tract, and also tends to be milk based, so milk that's produced by cows or somewhere else, and that is not our natural form of food for a human. So it's not exactly replicatable. A formula is not a great replacement necessarily, but it's the only thing that we really know about or know what to do with right now, right? And so there are places out there where women donate their breast milk and you
Mm-hmm.
can go get that. And I know that, I've had friends of my own. I don't have any children, but I've had friends of my own where they were in a situation where they weren't able to breastfeed, like it just wasn't working, for various reasons. And they were a little bit reluctant to go utilize some of these places where you can purchase breast milk because it is a hit to your ego and your pride a little bit. I understand that. But I hope for some of the listeners out there that are listening to this, like, know that if you really want to set your child up for the best, success with their health, like that should be something that you might want to consider as a replacement instead of going straight to formula. And we can get down a whole
Right.
rabbit hole of the push on formula in the food industry, but ultimately we need to be, like you said, every choice that you make or every action that you take is a opportunity to make a choice for your health or for your child's health. If you're raising a child, every time you sit down to eat, you have a choice to make. You can eat something that either supports your body and builds it up or breaks it down. When we go out to exercise, or when we look at our sleep, or the other choices that we're making in life, like every single action is an opportunity to make a choice on how you're going to support your body to either build up health or break it down, essentially.
Yes, absolutely. Our son, when he was born, just over 4 years ago, I could not produce enough breast milk, and I did everything. I drank the teas and the tinctures and the the cookies and all those little things that the midwives and doulas and my naturopath all recommended, and I did everything I could, and I still wasn't producing enough. And so the first rule is baby gets fed. And that's when I was introduced to Human Milk for Human Babies, which is
Mm,
a project where women, you basically, for those wherever you are, look for Human Milk for Human Babies Facebook group in your area, and they create. And if you have milk to donate, go to Human Milk for Human Babies and find the local Facebook group. And so there's women who are donating. So I connected with women who say, I eat organic and I avoid, they would give this list. I'm not on any medications. I eat organic. I do not drink alcohol. I don't drink coffee. My baby is this old and I have this many ounces to donate. And so we went around for the first 6 months of our son's life and supplemented the majority of his milk. I gave as much as I could, and then we
mhm.
drove around, and we would drive sometimes an hour away. And this one woman who was a client of one of our naturopaths who had flown to the East Coast, and she had a huge surplus. She shipped it frozen. She shipped it overnight to us, and that was like a
Wow.
month supply, like a huge cooler. It was like a month supply of breast milk, and so it can be done. It absolutely can be done, and it was a great adventure. And I actually made some friends that are still friends to this day.
Yeah.
So it can be a great support network to connect into. And if I do have another child and I have a surplus, I'll be so excited to donate it. But it's very interesting that we can see the correlation between whether someone was breastfed, whether they were birthed vaginally, and their health to this day. And so we know that if someone
Mhm,
wasn't, that we need to do extra support for the microbiome of their
mhm.
gut, and that really does play a role in their health. The last 2 weeks, I've decided to do. I love doing experiments on myself. I'm always shifting my diet. I'm always playing around with what does my body need. And so the last two
Same.
weeks, yeah, right. Well, of course. And I figured that you would just be playing with your diet. And I think the listener would benefit from this kind of mentality where it's like, be fluid and be willing to experiment, be willing to like do these little elimination diets with yourself. You're like, you know what? I'm going to do an experiment for the next 2 weeks, I'm not going to have any dairy, or I'm not going to have any grains, or just to experience what does your body feel like away from those foods. And so I decided to cut out. Now I've been gluten-free for 8 years, so I haven't eaten I don't eat barley, wheat, rye, or oats, but I decided to go flour free.
Mm.
And I've been sugar free for the most part, but like occasionally would have something with, some kind of natural sweetener. But I decided to go 100% sugar free. I'm already dairy free, flour free, and focus my foods on like whole food, plant based. So it's like a
Hmm.
very anti-inflammatory diet, and I wake up with so much more energy now. And I don't feel like I cut out that much. I just decided my plate is full of vegetables and whole grains. So like either brown rice or a sweet potato and just tons of vegetables and some legumes. And that's it. That's like my breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the last two
Hmm.
weeks. And I'm really impressed by how good I feel. And so there's been a few times where I was out or I was at a friend's house and I could have eaten sort of off my plan that I've created for myself. And I sat there and I thought, I could have that, like whatever the food was that was delicious, right? I could have that, gluten-free vegan cupcake at the birthday party last weekend, but I didn't, because I thought, you know what? I feel so good right now. And I just know that I won't feel as good after I eat that very pro-inflammatory food. And so we have to ask ourselves, like, do I want the 5 minutes of joy that eating this, McDonald's or whatever? I always use McDonald's as an example, but
Right.
I'm going to get a letter from them one day. Cancel, cancel, cancel. And just whatever that food is that is pro-inflammatory to you, is it 5 minutes of joy really worth the 3 days of
Mhm.
inflammation and maybe just feeling off and feeling kind of sluggish? Is it really worth it? And ultimately it wasn't for me. And I'm just feeling even better every day, noticing that the inflammation that was caused by flour products, even though it was gluten-free, and those grains, that it's dropping off my body and I'm feeling better and better. So it's a cool little mind trick to, once we're eating really clean, it's like it's not worth it to go
Mhm.
back and eat the foods that are harming us, because 5 minutes of pleasure in that 5 minutes of dopamine spike is not really worth 3 days of pain.
Right, right. Yeah, I love this concept. I mean, this is something that I talk with my clients all the time about is play this game with yourself, create presence by every time you're faced with a food choice is like ask yourself, is it worth it? Because most people are just like moving through life on autopilot. We were talking a little bit earlier about have you ever had that experience of driving home from work and all of a sudden you are in your driveway and you don't really remember how you got there because you were on autopilot. It's like a routine of what you do every single day. And most times that's how we're moving through life as well. And we're not paying attention to how does food or how does this experience or how does this actually really make me feel? And then questioning, like, is this worth it? And I know that was a shift too, actually, that I made in the beginning also when I started to move towards a gluten, dairy, sugar, soy free type of lifestyle, which is starting to make that connection of when I eat this, I feel this way. And is that how I want to be feeling? And after I'd been gluten free for some time. We went to Thailand in 2017 and we were in Chiang Mai, and I remember there was like a local dish there that sounded so amazing, and I decided to try it knowing that it had gluten in it. I shared it with my friend, and I didn't feel great afterwards. I had brain fog, my stomach was a little bit upset, and my joints were a little tender. And so I remember just consciously going through this process of, is this the way that I want to experience the rest of my trip? Because this was like day two when we
Right,
arrived there.
right.
And I was like, this is not how, like, I want to have energy. I want to remember and be clear minded, like all the beautiful sights that are to be seen here. I flew 36 hours from California to Thailand. Like, I don't want to mess this up, you know? And I think that that's just how we want to start living our life more on a day-to-day basis is really just creating that presence and recognizing, like, tuning into our body and seeing how it's responding to the things that we're doing. And also this point that you brought up too is that things can shift. One of the reasons that I kind of play around with my diet from time to time is because our body's always shifting. So when I was in the midst of healing Hashimoto's, I had tried, like, kind of started to get into a little bit of intermittent fasting or like more of a keto style diet. And I instantly realized that my body was not responding well to that. And I healed the Hashimoto's, and now I primarily eat like more of a keto style diet, and it totally works for me because I've resolved the underlying hormone imbalances that were going on. Or another great example of that is like eating seasonally. Here in Southern California and in the US, we are, it's summertime. And so with the hotter weather, like I'm finding my body craving like blueberries, or we walked by a peach tree the other day and I was like salivating, like looking at these peaches. And I was like, you know what? Like, this is my body. Like, we're meant to eat seasonally. Like, we're not meant to be forced into this like structured diet 100% of the time. I don't believe that. Like, if we look at our ancestors and even indigenous tribes that are around in our modern day society now, like they eat seasonally based upon what is available. They have great food rotation in their diet. And that's something that we should be considering too, as well. And you might find that some foods are problematic for you right now. You cut them out for a little bit, and then you may be able to reintroduce them and have no problem with them,
Mm-hmm.
And it's all
Absolutely.
about the overall load on your body. And sometimes we just need to stop adding fuel to the inflammatory fire and allow our body to heal. And then we're able to tolerate things much better afterwards.
I'd love to dive into what you teach your clients, the overall, what's the foundations of health that no matter what condition they have really benefits. So benefits 100% of the population to make sure that they're doing.
hmm So the first thing is figuring out what foods your body needs to eat to function at its potential. And I am not biased towards any type of diet. I really believe that you are unique and therefore your diet should be too. And that there is a difference between eating healthy and eating right for your body. Eating right for your body will incorporate healthy foods, but not every healthy food is right for your body. I think you just gave a great example of yourself and that you're gluten free and all these things, but maybe like even the gluten free flours were, even though they're quote unquote healthy, right, they were not doing you a good service at this point in time in your life. Or people like a banana. Bananas obviously would be considered a healthy food, but if you have blood sugar regulation issues or insulin resistance going on, that's not a healthy food for you right now. And so I really try to walk people through an exploratory process. Like we use food sensitivity testing, looking at their digestive system, as well as something called metabolic typing, to kind of find these pieces of the puzzle to figure out, okay, like what foods are right for your body. Then they go through this journaling experience to really dial that in, see how their body is reacting to certain foods, so that they create a connection with their body, an intuitive connection, so that they will have this knowledge moving forward about what foods are right for their body. And like, that's something you'll always have. That's priceless. And then really, that my other really huge emphasis is on sleep, because I'll say all the time, like, your diet and exercise efforts are worth nothing if you aren't sleeping well. And aside from sleeping well, like just good quality sleep during the right periods of time of the day. So our body, I'm sure you've talked about circadian rhythms and cortisol rhythms here on your show before. And our body has this natural rhythm to it that is in alignment with the sun and the moon cycles. And so there's certain times, like really critical times, that we should be sleeping. And generally speaking, that's from about 10 p.m. to at least 2 a.m. And then an extended like 8 hours would be like 10 p.m. to about 6 a.m. or so. And once the sun sets and temperature decreases and light decreases, our body is already starting to shift into this period of like, we're preparing for sleep. And based on this time clock that we're on, like certain critical functions are supposed to happen at certain times. Like a couple hours after the sun sets, your body will start releasing human growth hormone, and the liver is supposed to do its big, huge detoxification process around like 2 a.m. in the middle of the night. Well, if you're not sleeping during those times, those functions will not be happening, or they won't be happening at the extent that they should be. And you're missing out on these natural healing opportunities that happen all the time. And no matter how much you sleep in the next day, your body will never make up for those lost times. So that's why a lot of people can, like, they go to bed at midnight or at 1, and yes, they sleep into, like, 8 or 9 or 10 o'clock the next day, but they still feel groggy. It's because they missed out on that critical sleep time from 10 to 2, and they miss out on all those critical functions that their body is supposed to be doing at that time of night. And what's like a really good visual for this is people can Google, like, the Chinese medicine, like, body clock or time clock. And in Chinese medicine, they have it all mapped out on, like, at certain hours, at certain times of the day, like, your body's supposed to be doing these things. So if you're not sleeping during those hours, you're missing out on those incredibly important functions.
And how important is timing around eating? Because if someone's still digesting their food at 2 in the morning because they had a late night snack or they ate right before bed, how much does that disrupt the big liver healing that happens at 2 in the morning?
Mm-hmm. It can be different for every person. I have found, especially if somebody's got some more severe blood sugar imbalances that are going on, like, often some of those people actually really benefit from eating a high protein or fat containing snack right before bed, within that, like, 30-minute window before bed, because it helps to balance their blood sugar in the middle of the night. Versus other people won't do as well with that. So I think that's just on an individual basis to really figure those things out and what might work for you to resolve that issue. Like, when I have somebody eat a high fat or high protein snack before bed to balance their blood sugar in the middle of the night, once we get it balanced, they eventually don't need that anymore. And usually that comes from resolving what they're eating throughout the rest of the day, like making sure that they have balanced meals throughout the rest of the day. But I do believe that, and I've found this to be successful in most people, like, we do need to give our bodies a break from digesting, which is kind of where the whole philosophy around intermittent fasting comes into play, or like just having an eating window of like 11 a.m. to maybe 7 p.m. so that you give your body a break. There's a lot of healing benefit that occurs, like cell autophagy and things that can happen when we're not digesting all of the time, right? So I think it really, like, and that's where some of the lab testing really helps. Like, I can see on a Dutch test, if their cortisol or other things are super dysfunctional, then fasting isn't right for somebody, in order to balance things out at this point in time. Once we get them in a better place, and they can implement some intermittent fasting or specific eating windows that are right for them.
Absolutely. And that's where the individuality comes into play. So if someone doesn't have a blood sugar imbalance, then they might benefit from intermittent fasting or experimenting. This is where I love the experimenting. It's like, try it. I turned to my husband a few weeks ago and I said, let's try finishing dinner by 6 p.m. and then just seeing how long we last until we eat, until we break the fast. And it might be 2 p.m. the next day. Who knows? And let's just see how we feel. And I noticed that for me, I have way more energy in the morning when I make sure that the last morsel of food that gets put in my mouth is at 6 p.m. and that is just maybe drinking some water or some herbal tea, obviously caffeine free herbal tea, in the evening, and then going to sleep at a reasonable hour between 9 and 10. But that the next morning I have way more energy and I feel so much better than if I had eaten at 8 p.m. Because sometimes, I just get into the routine of feeding our kid and then doing the bedtime routine with him, getting him to sleep, and then I get to cook dinner for myself, right?
Right.
And that just that little change of eat with my son versus eat after he's gone to bed has hugely given me way more energy. And I mean, more energy than I could ever get from like 4 espresso shots. I'm just so impressed by how much energy that one tweak. So being willing to tweak and try things, but try it long enough. I had to try it for enough days to go, yeah, this really does make a difference. And then also the next experiment, which I'm working on, is what's optimal for my body right now to break the fast. Is it first thing in the morning? Is it later in the afternoon? Because it
Mm-hmm.
really is different for everyone. Because sometimes
Mm-hmm.
for some people, if we wait too long and we break the fast at like 2 p.m., then they end up being so hungry by 7 or 8 p.m. and they don't have the willpower to say, okay, I'm sticking to this. And so then they end up pushing their feeding window to be too late and they go to bed with a full stomach. So we have to play around with it. But I love the idea of let's experiment on ourselves and track it and track our progress and see how we feel.
I was going to add to that too, like recognizing you have different energy needs on different days. If you have a 12-hour work day, that may not be an ideal day to do an extended fast, and being a little bit flexible, I think also, and recognizing what are the demands being placed on your body and making sure that you're supporting whatever those demands are at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Stress is something that you've talked about that I think, especially as women, I mean, I'm a woman, so I don't know what it's like to be in a man's body. I'm sure, based on my observations of my husband, I am sure that men also equally do not deal with stress.
Yes,
but
agreed.
but I can speak as a woman. I know that we culturally do not deal with stress. That we really would rather put ourselves through the ringer, put ourselves last, drag ourselves through the mud. I had a client once who I gave her, the best diet plan for based on her needs and the supplements and the lifestyle changes. And we worked on everything and she seemed to be getting some results, but she hit a wall and I kept coming back to her stress. And she said, one day she goes, I don't feel stress. And I'm like, oh my gosh, thank you for saying that.
Mm,
Stress is not an emotion that you feel. Like she was like, when you actually feel stress as an emotion, you are at your breaking point.
mhm.
When it's an actual sensation that you're feeling, like you like feeling your blood pressure in your neck and your head, like that is
Right.
you are way at the breaking point. Like, so you don't feel stress, you're just doing things that cause stress on the body by not managing it. She had a mother who was sick, she had a young child at home, and she was a very busy like manager. So she was constant demands on her at work with her mother who was ill and her young child. And it was just, there was not one break. And so I started, I gave her all these things that she could do throughout the day to manage her stress. But because it didn't seem important, it wasn't, it just, and I get it because it doesn't seem that important. Like, why is laughing and hugging and social time and relaxing, that stuff doesn't seem important. What seems important is working at your job 12 hours a day and then taking care of your kids and then taking care of your husband and just really putting ourselves last.
Mhm.
But all of that, the lifestyle of not managing stress exacerbates disease and causes the body not be able to heal. Can you talk a bit about your observation
Yes,
with
please.
stress and its relationship to disease?
Yeah. Well, talked about in the beginning too, just the concept of let's redefine stress. So, stress is anything that places a burden on the body that results in inflammation and dysfunction, right? So, we're talking here about mental emotional stress, but there's also a ton of other things that can stress the body. For example, traveling across different time zones. If you're a
Mm-hmm.
traveler, that places a stress on the body and disrupts your natural circadian rhythm that we were talking about earlier. Or toxins in your environment or mold, like we were talking about earlier. Those all place a stress, like a burden on the body that then results in inflammation and that dysfunction. And the mental emotional side of stress is so fascinating because I love this example of the woman that you were just speaking of. Is I find this too with clients in that the mindset that we've developed in our modern day society. And I remember watching the presidential elections that we had here in the US. What was it, 2016, with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump running against each other. And there was a point where Hillary Clinton got really sick and she just kept powering through. And I just remember thinking in my mind, this is such a terrible example for women.
Mm-hmm.
Like a powerful woman, I think, would actually take a step back and say, I need to take a break and recuperate and take care of myself, because what good are we with a person if she were to have won the presidency? Like, what good are we with somebody who's going to be chronically ill because they're not really willing to prioritize themselves and take a break from the amount of stress that they're experiencing? And I often have clients, because I tend to work with really type A personalities who have climbed the corporate career ladder from a young age, and they sacrifice their health as a result of doing so. Like, they have this defense mechanism built in, almost, I would call it, is like, they just put their head down and keep plowing through. And they never really stop to acknowledge how stress is affecting their body. And then they come to us with all of these health issues, and we, again, like you said, are doing all the diet things, all the other things, but the health issues aren't fully resolving themselves. And finally we can correlate, well, let's start journaling this or writing this down, and we can notice, like, oh, you had a super long day at work, and then you were working on a huge project, and all of a sudden you exploded with some symptoms, or you were traveling and then you exploded with some symptoms. And we can start to kind of connect the dots. Like, I think people just don't want to. And it's not even a lack of wanting. It's kind of like an ingrained ignorance, because they just don't know any better, because of the mindset that we've developed in our society to even be able to acknowledge the fact that what they're doing in their lives is contributing to their health. Like the fact that they're not acknowledging stress, or that it, again, going back to this concept of just because it's common doesn't mean that it's normal scenario. Like, I've had conversations with clients before where they're doing all the things, and I'm like, we need to start looking at the fact of, like, it's your job. Like, have you considered getting a new job, because it's what's killing you basically. And that's where I infuse some of that transformational work in the coaching that I do with clients, because it's not uncommon for a lot of my clients to either end up changing career paths or moving out of their city or their home, because we start to recognize that those are some of the biggest burdens of stress that is depleting their body and making them feel unwell.
Mm. Can you elaborate on certain conditions that you've seen that stress has caused or exacerbated?
I mean, I keep going back to Hashimoto's because it's so close to home, but that is certainly one of them. And when we look at the energetic aspects of autoimmunity, it's manifests a lot of times and correlates with, like, feeling attacked in our personal lives in some kind of
Mm.
way. So especially for women, and we see that women are, like, I can't remember exactly what the statistic is, but so much more likely to develop an autoimmune condition over men, and to be diagnosed with a thyroid imbalance as well. And a lot of this comes from, like, if we look at the energetic aspects, like, the thyroid is related to our throat chakra. And the throat chakra is all about communication, like the communication center. So when we're not standing up for ourselves and setting boundaries and speaking our truth and owning our self-worth, we're stuffing all of this energy and creating a roadblock that can then manifest itself into a disease state, essentially. Or, we're kind of evolving out of this time of, like, a more masculine era into a more feminine presence now, spiritually speaking, in the world. And so many women have tried to keep up in a man's world, where they don't call out sick. They don't stay at home with their kids to take care of them. They shove their emotions to the side. I mean, I remember working in the corporate world and having one of my regional boss came in, and he said, "You're too emotional of a manager." And,
Oh
and
my gosh.
talk about, like, stunting my health progression right there, or, like, giving me a nice good kick in the gut, or should I say my thyroid, and just making me feel really bad about being emotional, like, as a woman. And I think now, in the world that I work in now, like, my attunement with my emotions is part of what helps me to create success, and also is what helps me be such a good advocate and intuitive leader for some of the people that I work with, you know? And so when
Mm-hmm.
we're just in any point in time, whenever you're not fully expressing yourself, you're creating a blockage of energy that's happening in the body. And so when we're shoving emotions to the side, not acknowledging stress, it's going to fester and it's going to manifest itself in some kind of health condition for sure.
I know there's, like, it's so individual, it's so specific to each person's circumstance. Can you give some great general for everyone kind of advice on how to figure out what is causing stress for them and how what kind of steps they can take to de-stress?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a couple of like scientific tools that you could use to evaluate. So, like heart rate is one of them. When we're stressed out, our body releases cortisol, which acts almost as like a adrenaline rush. And so, your heart rate variability is one way to be able to measure stress, or just your heart rate in general. You gave a great example earlier talking about your blood pressure, also, right? So, what you were having a psychological response to like the stress of your kid running around, your husband being there, and all these things happening. And you knew that when you got into that quiet room with that naturopath, that if she took your blood pressure again, like it would look better. So the physiological responses, anxiety, I think would be another one as well to look at. Like that's something that lets you know that you can be an indication of stress also. And just feeling wound up, when we're wound around the axle, or when we are, I call shooting all over ourselves. Like I should have done this, or I should have done that, or I should be doing this. We're being self-critical. That can be another indication of just being really stressed out or trying to control a situation, and that over sense of control is stressful in itself, right? Um, you know, I mean, the list can go on. There's emotional aspects of eating. So people recognizing if they're stressed out, and then they tend to eat as a result of that. Like often will have clients kind of assess that when they say that they feel a need to snack, or that they're hungry all the time, and we're working on improving their diet, and like they're doing a lot of the right things, but they still have this sense of being hungry all the time or a need to snack. Then I ask them to stop and shift. I want you to stop in the moment when you feel that way, check in with yourself, and ask yourself what is really going on, and check in and see if it is like this an urge of boredom or a reaction to stress in some kind of way, or scarcity or a fear. Like what is the emotion that's coming up? And then implement an activity to shift whatever that is that's happening. So we will define like some things that they can do, like go outside, do some deep breathing techniques or something like that, of that nature. And like those will usually resolve the problem once they shift that mindset and get out of that stress state. In terms of like things that you can do, deep breathing, hands down, is the single most effective and easiest thing that anybody can do to take themselves out of a stressed state into a rest or digest and healing state. So one of the things that I want to drop for your people here, Ashley, is like your body can only heal in a relaxed state.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about how many times a day you're actually in a relaxed state, it's very infrequent. When we adopt the deep rhythmic breathing patterns of a relaxed person, it automatically flips the switch in our brain. It takes us out of sympathetic fight or flight mode and puts us into parasympathetic mode. And I'll usually have people do a deep breathing technique where they inhale for 5 seconds, they hold it for 5 seconds, and then they exhale for 7. And they just do that 5 to 7 or 5 to 10 times. It doesn't require like learning how to meditate or any devices or other tools. Like it's something that is accessible to you all of the time. I have clients do this right before they sit down to eat so that they can get into parasympathetic mode, because you can actually only really digest your food when you're in parasympathetic mode. So that's called the rest and digest state, basically, versus the fight or flight state. I've had clients use this breathing technique when they're feeling anxious about getting onto a plane, when they're in a meeting and they feel themselves getting worked up. Nobody can tell that you're sitting there doing deep breathing. You could be sitting in a room with 20 people, on the spotlight in a board meeting and be doing deep breathing, and nobody knows the difference, Otherwise, there's some really great tools out there. If people want some more like biofeedback stuff, like something like Heart Math is a great tool that you can use. One of my clients was just telling me about, she's been using something called a Muse. So the word A, and then Muse is Muse, that helps you with your meditation state, and it can identify when your brain starts to wander. So it kind of pulls you back in, because meditation is another way that we get into that relaxed state as well. So there's a ton of tools out there. I know that, different Fitbits and Apple iWatches, like all of these technology tools that we have are like starting to incorporate more of this stuff in there as well, like a mindfulness tool that helps you just to take a moment to breathe and relax and kind of calm down a little bit, right?
Got it. I like the free one. The just breathe.
Yeah, just breathe. Just breathe.
Taking that time to do that slow, deep breathing is great. Thank you so much. There's so many nuggets of gold in what you've shared today. What kind of homework would you like to give our listeners? What kind of changes would you like to help them, make in their life? Can you have like give them an assignment so they can go and do it and make some really positive changes?
Yeah. Well, since we're talking about deep breathing, and I just said it, I think that the deep breathing before you eat is huge because you could be eating the healthiest food in the world, but if you're not digesting it very well, you're not getting much out of it, And oftentimes in our fast paced life, we're constantly eating on the go or eating with distraction. And so simply doing this 5-5-7 breath, like I said, 5 to 10 times before every meal, you'll probably notice some shifts in the amount of energy that you get out of your food, your ability to digest your food a little bit better, and also just feeling satiated and fuller for longer are usually some of the really key things that people get from that. And then the other thing, like we talked about, that was so important today was sleep. So for everybody out there, like we said, the critical sleep time is like be asleep by 10 p.m. or as close to it as possible most nights out of the week. And most nights would probably be like 5 nights out of the week. If you can hit it every night out of the week, awesome. But, I'm a realist. There's going to be Friday night dinners to go to or parties or whatever. So there might be, those times when you're up a little bit later. But on the majority of your time, like, get to bed at a reasonable hour and your body will 100% thank you for it. Definitely. And I think those would be the two biggest things that I would recommend as homework for people. And if I was to add a third, it would really be to just be more present every single time you sit down to eat and checking in with yourself, like we were talking about earlier. And asking, like, remember, every time you sit down to eat, you have a choice. You can eat something that builds you up or breaks you down. And just being present in that moment and making a conscious decision about how it is that you want to feel after that meal or for the rest of the day or into tomorrow. And when we connect with those choices, it makes it so much easier just to naturally choose foods that are right for us versus the ones that aren't as beneficial for us.
And you said sit down to eat. So that's actually part of the
Mm,
homework.
that's part of the homework.
I know women who will stand to eat by the kitchen sink, shovel the food in their mouth in between doing the laundry and getting the kids to bed or whatever, or drive and eat. It is sit
Mhm.
down and take that 5, 10, 15 minutes to eat slowly and to
Yes.
be conscious of that everything we put in our body is feeding our body. It's funny to me that someone will take let's say a prescription medication, the size of a pea. Let's say they take one pill a day to manage their blood pressure or manage their blood sugar or manage their thyroid, but it is a pill the size of one pea that they take
Hmm.
every day. And that tiny little pill the size of a pea has a huge impact on the body. And I'm not saying a negative. I'm just saying it has an impact, right? Like it can shift your blood pressure, or it can shift your blood sugar, or it can shift your hormones. So it has this tiny little thing that you put in your mouth once a day or maybe twice a day really impacts your body, right? And we
Hmm.
know that, like if someone takes an Advil for pain, like they know they take this tiny little thing and it has a huge impact on their body. It's going to shift how they feel. And yet we've disconnected that everything else we put in our food has an impact on how we feel. There's a disconnect. So like people are eating the standard American diet, right? And not
Hmm.
getting that huge plate of food can, way bigger than any of those pills they take, has even more impact on
Mm-hmm.
the body than that one little pill does. So
Mm-hmm.
everything we put in our mouth throughout the day is like a medication. If we think about that, is it a medication that is, and then it has side effects, right? So fried food, for example, has absolutely, studies have proven, will take 10 years off of our life. If you eat fried food every day, it will take 10 years off your life and cause heart disease and increase the chances of cancer. So it's been proven, it's studied enough that these foods that are readily available to us have side effects. So if we look at everything we put in our mouth, like either this is a healing food or this is a harmful food, just like medications. We're really careful about the medications we choose to be on or not choose to be on based on their effects or side effects. And if we take that approach with our food, that everything we put into our mouth is healing or harmful, and another thing that I've had to struggle with, that I've been doing a lot of emotional healing for years around food, and that food is something for pleasure, like ice cream or chocolate bars or whatever, and it's like catching myself going, wait a second, like, am I missing so much joy in my life that I need to get a dopamine
Yes.
high from the food? And I really have to catch myself and go, okay, when I wanted that Twinkie, or when I want that, that ice cream, or that even a celebratory ice cream with my kid, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay. And even if it's vegan and all that stuff, it's still looking to food for dopamine versus and the stuff I'm putting it in my mouth, and it's what is the effects over the next few days on my health versus how can I increase joy and dopamine and excitement and love, and how can I increase that amount of happiness in my life and not have it come from food. So
Yes.
we do, we do live in the real world. We do go to birthday parties. There's always birthday cake. I get that. That's one thing that people can choose to participate in or not participate in. But I did find myself every day seeking food for pleasure. And every day opening that fridge going, what am I going to eat? What am I going to make for dinner? And based on wanting more pleasure. And I had to catch
Mm-hmm.
myself and go, okay, I am making food choices that are motivated by this lack of happiness in my life. And I'm trying to fulfill happiness from food. And that ultimately is destroying my health.
Yeah.
So having that and you know what? Healthy food, like my salads, taste absolutely amazing. I'm sure I'm getting dopamine from my salads now.
Mm-hmm.
I can make them taste really good, but I know I'm also getting a little bit of a high knowing that everything I'm feeding my body is uh, moving me towards better health. And so for me, there is that emotional component, that psychological component, that mindset that all comes into play when choosing food. And you've outlined some really great fun steps, that sitting down, being conscious, taking those deep breaths, and asking yourself, is this food that is healing for my body, or maybe I'm missing something else in life and trying to
Mm-hmm.
compensate. So I love your advice around that. I know that you have a free gift for our listeners, so I definitely want to
Yeah.
make sure the link to everything that Jen does is going to be in the show notes of today's podcast at learnturehealth.com. Your free gift is a 21-day program. I'd love for you to just explain a bit about what it is. And the link to it is holistichealthboss.com/truehealth.
Mm-hmm.
So what is this wonderful 21-day free program that you're giving us?
So the 21-day free program actually goes through in more detail a lot of the stuff that we talked about today. And it's kind of getting to the roots of, why you might be feeling fat, sick, or tired, all the time, essentially, and uncovering some of those hidden healing opportunities. So week one is actually all about exploring what food is right for your body so that it can function at its potential. I actually take you through some of the journaling aspects that I mentioned earlier today to really narrow in on how is your body responding to certain foods, and then based upon that feedback you can then go and make adjustments to really figure out the perfect meals for you and the foods that work with your body best. And then week two we move into talking more in depth about sleep, giving you some more tools to improve the quality of your sleep, shifting your sleep cycle so that you're just ultimately getting more restful sleep in general, which are really going to support all of the metabolic processes that your body goes through. And then week three is where you get to explore some parasite, bacteria, yeast overgrowth opportunities that might be happening. So going through some self-screenings where you can check and do some home tests to like pre-screen yourself to see if these are potential issues for you. And then I'm definitely available to answer questions for you as you go through that process. And I love to hear the feedback that people have from it too and what they're finding and exploring. And obviously, I'm open to helping people in more depth if they need some more guidance beyond that. But those are probably like the three big key areas that I focus on with people. And when we make those shifts in those areas, they start feeling better, instantly within a matter of a couple of days or a couple of weeks. There's just an overall improvement in their health. And it's bringing awareness to some things that maybe they didn't know previously so they can just support themselves better, moving forward.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that free gift. The website again is holistichealthboss.com/truehealth. And I know that my listeners will love gaining more insight from you. It's been so great having you on the show today. Is there anything you'd like to say that was left unsaid or anything you'd like to say to wrap up today's interview?
I just want to empower people and leave them with that. I always like to say, and I think that you're kind of in this line of work too, Ashley, is like, we're in the business of making the impossible possible. We're here to help people that feel stuck and that aren't getting answers or solutions. So no matter what your situation is, just know that there is probably a solution out there for you. And it's just a matter of finding the right person to work with. And sometimes you have to just keep digging. And really that the possibilities are endless. Like I also like to tell people, like, you only know what you know until you know something different. And I know that even when I've done lab testing on myself, like I'm in a really good place right now, but every time I get when I get a lab test back, sometimes I'm like, oh, like I could improve in that area. Like I just got my cortisol and dopamine values back and they were sitting a little bit low. And I was like, well, I consider myself a pretty energetic and happy person. But what is there like a possibility for it? Like I could feel even better than this, So the possibilities are really endless. And I think that, just coming from a place of empowerment, like we were talking about earlier today, that you're not doomed to be the result of a diagnosis or a situation that you're in. There's likely a solution that's out there for you, and just to keep searching and having hope.
Wonderful. Absolutely. Yes, there's always hope. The body has the miraculous ability to heal itself. We got to give it what it needs. Stop putting in it what it doesn't need. And that there's absolutely hope. I've seen people, I've even seen a woman who was in a wheelchair from MS said that, was told that she'd never walk again. And a month later was walking and pain-free because she shifted her nutrition, her diet, and her lifestyle. So just because a doctor says you're going to have something for the rest of your life doesn't necessarily mean it's so. And even if you do, you can optimize. We can always optimize our health and well-being, but it does take time and it takes effort and it takes being a detective. And that's what I love doing what you do. I love what you do because you're that detective that helps people to go deep and find the root cause and support the body holistically. So wonderful. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing. And it's, of course, and giving us your free 21-day program as well. It's been such a pleasure to dive into this topic with you today.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. And it's been wonderful to chat with you.
Hello, true health seeker. Have you ever thought about becoming a health coach? Do you love learning about nutrition and how we can shift our lifestyle and our diet so that we can gain optimal health and happiness and longevity? Do you love helping your friends and family to solve their health problems and to figure out what they can do to eat healthier? Are you interested in becoming someone who can grow their own business, support people in their success? Do you love helping people? You might be the perfect candidate to become a health coach. I highly recommend checking out the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. I just spent the last year in their health coaching certification program, and it really blew me away. It was so amazing. I learned over 100 dietary theories. I learned all about nutrition. but from a standpoint of how we can help people to shift their life and shift their lifestyle to gain true holistic health. I definitely recommend you check them out. You can Google Institute for Integrative Nutrition, or IIN, and give them a call, or you can go to learntruehealth.com/coach, and you can receive a free module of their training to check it out and see if it's something that you'd be interested in. Be sure to mention my name, Ashley James, and the Learn True Health podcast, because I made a deal with them that they will give you the best price possible. I highly recommend checking it out. It really changed my life to be in their program, and I'm such a big advocate that I wanted to spread this information. We need more health coaches. In fact, health coaching is the largest growing career right now in the health field. So many health coaches are getting in and helping people, because you can work in chiropractic offices, doctors' offices, you can work in hospitals, you can work online through Skype and help people around the world. You can become an author. You can go into the school system and help your local schools shift their programs to help children be healthier. You can go into senior centers and help them to shift their diet and lifestyle to best support them in their success and their health goals. There's so many different available options for you when you become a certified health coach. So check out IIN, check out the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, mention my name, get the best deal. Give them a call and they'll give you lots of free information and help you to see if this is the right move for you. Classes are starting soon. The next round of classes are starting at the end of the month. So you're going to want to call them now and check it out. And if you know anyone in your life who would be an amazing coach, please tell them about it. Being a health coach is so rewarding and you get to help so many people.